So nice to meet you all. I want to set the stage for today's conversation by telling you the story of a kid named Griffin Sanders. So this is Griffin right here. You're looking at an image of him. He's a perfectly normal 10-year-old boy. He lives in the suburbs of Denver, Colorado. And a little while ago, Griffin was out for a drive on Saturday morning with his grandmother, 78, and his younger brother, 4. And they were out, going to get some ice cream, have a kind of fun Saturday with the family. And they're driving on the freeway, and all of a sudden, his grandmother has a heart attack, and she slumps over the wheel. And now the car is, out of control, drifting in and out of traffic. And what does perfectly normal Griffin Sanders do? Perfect normal boy, I'm sure, just like all of us were when we were children. Well, he grabs the steering wheel, navigates the car through now oncoming traffic, puts the vehicle down on the side of the road, reaches into his grandmother's purse, and calls 911. Totally normal behavior, right? So the first responders get there, and they come upon the scene, and they're like, okay, wait, was there another adult here? Like, did someone flee the scene? Like, who's the missing person? And he goes, no, I just thought it was a level in Mario Kart, so I did what I would have done in the game. And it's I'm not saying every kid is this bright, but one of the most inspiring things for me about this generation is its ability to connect and to use a fluid intelligence in a new and interesting way. Now, a great deal of the reason why this next generation is so engaged and so capable of reacting and responding and thinking things through is that they have been brought up on games. And you can see the impact of games on our society, particularly digital games, on our society all over the place. Of course, I have an image of a drone pilot up here. It's not necessarily a game, but it has many of the same characteristics of a game. And that actually forms the foundation for understanding how we can create engagement and addiction. Because one of the things, and combat it as well. One of the things that I noticed, in my work, I've spent the last 20 years in the video game industry and the last 10 really being the chief advocate for gamification, is that there's a recurring theme in a lot of engaging behavior. The recurring theme in our brains when we do something that we find really engaging is this neurotransmitter called dopamine. And dopamine is released when we challenge ourselves to something, and then we achieve that thing. Our brain secretes a little bit of dopamine, and dopamine feels really good. And so it makes us want to do that over and over and over again. The cool thing about dopamine is that it is the fundamental engine of the success of humanity. It is what has driven us to the moon. It is what has driven us to innovate. It's what makes us, run long distances and discover new things. But it's also a system that's very easy to hijack. The line between a good, healthy amount of engagement and dangerous levels of engagement is pretty gray and pretty squirrely. And we're going to talk about both of those sides of the equation. The most obvious example of this as a problem, so we've got the, games used in good ways, but then the problem side of it, the most obvious example, probably all of us have experienced this, is the endless capacity for human beings to look down into their phone like this for hours at a time. And this is sort of the canary in the coal mine of this emerging problem. It's not the biggest problem necessarily that we face as a society, but it's signaling something very important about the future. And that is that we need to develop a balanced relationship with technology. Each and every one of us needs to develop a balanced relationship with technology, particularly in an environment in which we are expected to do more than ever before, with greater focus and attention than we've ever had before, but also where we're bombarded nonstop by, pop-ups and notifications and interesting things that can happen in our own sense of FOMO, fear of missing out, anxiety, loneliness, and so on. And so, I view this as one of the really important things that we need to work on. And so, like I said, for the vast majority of the last 10 years, I've been, or for the last 10 years, I've been the sort of chief exponent of this engaging technology movement called gamification, which seeks to bring, game-like thinking to various aspects of the economy. And so, to some extent, I am personally and partially responsible for the level of addiction that people have with their devices today. My work, either directly with all the largest tech companies or in training people, has been used and is in just about every sort of addicting app that you use today. And so I built up a tremendous corpus of knowledge and understanding about how to create engagement in an algorithmic way with people. But I also realized a couple of years ago that was going too far, noticing that device balance issue. And so I founded this company called Onward, which is currently my project. And Onward's mission is to help people achieve that tech life balance. It's to help bring a little bit of sanity to the mix. And so the things that we do, which may or may not be interesting to all of you in the room, are this sort of training and technology combo to help organizations understand how to foster tech life balance. So typically there's two different sides to that equation. One of them is distraction management, and this has been the majority of the work that we've done so far, is helping to ensure that key personnel stay focused on their tasks when they are doing their tasks, despite the possible interruptions, particularly of their devices, but of other things as well. So we've done a bunch of work and a bunch of thinking on that. But also on the other side, when we create systems of engagement for stakeholders, whether they're internal or external, making sure that we do that in an ethical way, making sure we do that in a systemic way, and making sure that we have imparted to all members of our organizations how the need for and then the tools to help achieve this tech life balance. And I think, from my standpoint, this is the big emerging health crisis of our era. And I will say that the important distinction, and this applies to both sides of this puzzle, is that every company in our economy, every organization in our economy, is attempting to make you addicted to their products and services. If it were up to Taco Bell, they would like for you to eat all 4 meals at Taco Bell every single day of your life. And I know we're only supposed to have 3 meals, but I've thrown in the 4th bonus meal for Taco Bell, the late night one usually. So they would love to get as many meals out of you as they possibly can, without any regard for whether or not you should or should not be eating that or doing that at that moment. And the bigger issue, than what the food industry, for example, does, is that in the tech business, the core economy is about getting people's engagement, getting their attention, and keeping it for a period of time so that companies can monetize that. And so as a result, companies like Facebook, Google, Snapchat, and so on have hired the best and brightest minds in our world to build algorithms that are designed to get and keep you addicted to their products. Those algorithms do not respond normally to things like willpower. So while you can train somebody to have willpower to not eat that 4th meal at Taco Bell, it's very difficult to train somebody to have willpower to not use their device when what's actually happening in the background is that, like Facebook, for example, is running hundreds of psychological tests against you every day. Hundreds of them. Bum, 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 bum. It's constantly trying to figure out what will get you to do the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And we have to remember, as leaders of organizations, that time is a zero-sum game. So everybody who benefits from the engagement economy has to understand that the arms race is in this kind of like smart algorithmic design. And so as leaders of an organization, is not necessarily about monetizing the public's engagement. I think the important lesson is to build systems that are as good, as fun, as cool, as interesting as the things that people could do in their spare time, and then give people the tools and the training so that they can stay focused and free of distraction. And I think distraction is a tremendous cost on our society. Now, the way that I go about this, and the thing that I advocate for, is to use gamification. And we've thrown this word around, and you've probably heard it before, but more or less, gamification is engaging users and changing their behavior. The best ideas from games, loyalty programs, and behavioral economics. It is a kind of consolidated design philosophy and model for creating, a beneficial, let's say, engagement with people. And there are 4 areas of the organization in which gamification plays an important role, and has played an important role for many companies. And I'm going to show you some examples and talk design principles. We won't be able to get into everything today, but I'll be available to all of you afterwards to talk about these issues and digital distraction and so on. So 4 main ways that gamification has been deployed generally in the enterprise: training, culture, retention, and recruitment. And there's a little sort of asterisk on leadership, which is a more complicated subject for fostering using gamification, but NextJump has a lot of experience with. So let's talk about training, because I think this is the thing that most people think of. This is about 50% of all gamification investment. And there's lots of evidence that gamified training offers superior outcomes to traditional forms of training. So one of the most interesting examples was at Beth Israel Hospital in New York. They conducted a study where they had surgeons play an action game on their Xbox at a regular interval prior to doing surgery. So they would play a game. It wasn't a surgery game. It was an action game on their Xbox. And then they would measure the outcomes of their surgical performance. And what they found, which was really shocking, I think shocking to everybody, was that surgeons who played games regularly had committed 37% fewer mistakes in their surgery, and were 27% faster in the creation of surgical outcomes. So it is a substantial performance improvement, substantial. And what's interesting about it is it's not like for like training. It's not literally a surgery game, which would be one way of doing this. It's actually taking off the shelf games that are really powerful at fostering hand-eye coordination, culture, community, problem solving, and using those to encourage those particular behaviors. Now, I want to point out that this is a particularly kind of novel way of thinking about the problem, and also one in that not every organization can implement, because this is like but this is to a great extent about that new way of training people. I'm sure all of you have had the sort of standard training, and the standard training generally is pretty boring, and it's generally pretty Socratic. And game-based training, or gamified training, really allows people to do more, move at their own pace, and generally speaking is more fun and engaging, and that's what causes people to do it. Another example that's a little bit different comes from Delta Airlines. And so Delta, some years ago, needed to onshore a large population of agents and so on. They used to offshore, and then they decided to bring it back to the US. And one of the things that they realized was that American geography education was not very good. And geography is an essential skill for airline employees across the spectrum. So instead of just training people by rote, or buying an off-the-shelf kind of geography workbook or training system, Delta decided to create something a little bit more clever, and they built this thing called Ready, Set, Jet. And what Ready, Set, Jet does is it's a series of little mini games that people play, which teach them about geography, the Delta Way systems, and so on. Little mini games that they play. The coolest thing about Ready, Set, Jet is that in the first year after its introduction, Delta employees did 4 years equivalent worth of training. So they did 4 times the amount of training that they normally would have done, purely voluntarily using a game. And I think this is important because it has very large cost, scale, and employee satisfaction implications. The other topic is, of course, culture. And this is a project that we worked on, that my team at Dopamine worked on. So for KPMG, many of you know the consulting firm. They are a global organization, 100,000 plus employees all over the world, many different cultures, many different business practices. And they were looking for a way to kind of train the population on the culture of the organization, to acculturate them to KPMG and help them understand how to do that. And so we built for them this game, which was very, very popular, called Globe Runner. That was a trivia game about in the style of You Don't Know Jack, for those of you who remember that game. This trivia game, basically, that you would play. And you could earn points and figure out, understand how KPMG works and the company's philosophies and its views and its morals and all this kind of stuff. And what's interesting about both Globe Runner and the Delta Ready Set Jet example is neither of those trainings were compulsory. So both of these trainings were optional, completely optional. So people could take it, or they could take the other training, or they could take no training. And participation rates were amazing, north of 80% for KPMG Globe Runner, and in the case of Delta employees, a kind of similar number. And it's so much better when you try to change somebody's behavior to let them feel like they decided to make that change on their own. And this is one of the other big promises of gamifying in the organization, is that you create a system that has the purpose of the organization in mind. So it's designed to foster something that the organization wants, but the user feels like they have agency, they have control, they can set their own pace, they can learn it, and it's fun. And that tends to produce higher levels of attachment and engagement. Another project that we worked on that's very different, but in a kind of similar vein of acculturation, is we built this project for the government of Dubai, the Emirate. And they are working on aggressive social goals for Dubai 2025. So they're trying to improve civic engagement, change the way that people behave towards each other and towards the city, get people more involved, get them to volunteer. And so the Executive Council of Dubai decided that the right way to do that was to build a game. And so we built this game called Dubai City Builder, which, for those of you who play or have played SimCity, you might be somewhat recognizable to you right away. It's basically a city building game in which the goals are to achieve the goals that the government of Dubai has set for the population. So very non-coercive, and that region isn't always known for non-coercive approaches, is a very non-coercive, a very user-friendly, very citizen-friendly way of trying to acculturate people in a country, for those of you who don't know, where 85%, 90% of the population are foreign expats. So it's a very kind of interesting mix of different cultures and ideas. And so we haven't yet launched Dubai City Builder publicly, but it's going to launch shortly. And early indications are that people think it's really cool and they love it, and it gives us an opportunity to do this at scale. Can you imagine training the population of 4.5 million people of a small city state? Manually, it would be very difficult. So this allows a certain amount of scale. Now, the other aspect of gamification in the enterprise that is very popular is the use of the concept in recruitment. So, some of you may have familiarity with this already, but one of my favorite examples of this, what you're looking at, was a billboard that ran on the 101 in San Francisco, which is a freeway in the Bay Area between San Francisco and San Jose, very nerdy people. And it says the first 10-digit prime found in consecutive digits of E in curly brackets.com. And when you went to this website, so it's no longer there, but if you could correctly answer that question and you went to that website, they were like, okay, cool. Let's test your math skills. Let's test your logic skills. And they basically gave people a onboarding exam, like a kind of pre-registration questionnaire that they were doing, that they felt was challenging and fun and weird, and they didn't actually know who the company was, who was behind this a particular billboard, and it turns out it was Google. And if they actually passed all 10 questions that they need to get, then Google would say, hey, apply for a job because you seem like Google material. So it's a very targeted, thoughtful, gamified recruitment example. The other example, and it's kind of an old example now, but it's nonetheless really instructive, is America's Army, which, I had the pleasure of sitting down with the original lieutenant who created the program for the Army. And basically the premise was that video games were an excellent way to acculturate people, to recruit people who otherwise wouldn't necessarily be considering the Army in their kind of frame of reference of what they wanted to do with their career. So America's Army is the video game that you can download free. Of course, it's paid for by by the armed services, by the armed forces, and you download this game for free and you play an Army. You don't play necessarily a general. You play like a foot soldier at the beginning of the game, and you kind of level up and you go through, and it sort of shows you what life is like in the Army, and creates a pathway, creates a kind of channel for interested, engaged, aligned people to then become potential recruits. And America's Army is still the armed forces' cheapest recruitment tool that's ever been created by a wide margin, and that works at scale, so not in small doses. And it's very interesting. And this is a somewhat different way of thinking about this problem, because the Google recruitment billboard isn't exactly at first glance like a traditional game, whereas America's Army is, of course, feels like a traditional game. And sometimes it's better to do something that looks like a game, and it depends on who we're talking to, what the problem is, what we're trying to train or convey or recruit. And other times it's better to use the principles of gamification without making the thing feel like an actual video game. And so it's really situationally dependent. There is no one right answer and part of the corpus of knowledge that we've sort of built up over time. And I want to give you one sort of last example of this, which I think is really fun. And it comes from Domino's. And so Domino's built this app called Domino's Pizza Hero. And in Domino's Pizza Hero, you play a pizza maker, pizzaiolo or pizzaiola. And you actually go through the whole process of making a pizza. You get the dough, you knead the dough, you spread it out, you put the sauce, cheese, ingredients, whatever it is that you want. And with a single flick of your finger from inside the game, you can order a pizza to be delivered to you live and in person. So the pizza that you create inside this game can be then baked and delivered to you from your local Domino's. But even more interestingly, right, than that, if you're very good at making pizzas, Domino's will invite you to apply for a job. And what I love about this example is that it really combines the three things that most kind of organizational leaders are looking for in a program, right? And this is for for-profit companies, obviously, but it sells people, so it sells product, it recruits employees, and it conveys the brand message in a very clear way. It conveys the story of the product. And it's important to remember that this next generation is very skeptical of the statements that authority figures make. They're especially skeptical. So the idea here is, rather than telling people, Domino's makes the freshest pizzas with the freshest ingredients sourced from all over the world by hand, instead of saying that to people, telling people that, they actually invite people in to experience the world of being a Domino's team member. And that is a much more powerful way, to communicate with certainly with the millennial, Gen Z, so on generation. And actually, I want to give you one more example because I think it's relevant, but I didn't put the slide in. One of my other favorite examples comes from the government of Moscow, the Sochi Olympic Committee, and Visa. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with like Russian, Russian political frameworks, but Russia has a little bit of a death problem. And in fact, its male population, the average life expectancy of a man in Russia has declined to 57 years. It used to be in parallel with the US. It used to be, year for year, and it has declined substantially. And that's a result of drinking and depression and, so on. But there are many different reasons. And so the government had a particular motivation to help people get fit, get them trained and fit and get them to think about fitness. And so for the Sochi Olympics, they built a really cool machine, a ticket vending machine in the Moscow subway, where basically if you did 10 squats in front of the machine, you got a free subway ticket. So you could still buy the regular ticket, or if you preferred to put the effort in, you could do the squats, get the free ticket. And I love this example as well because it brings together many of the different ideas that we've talked about. It's fun, it's novel, it tells a story, it teaches somebody something. And we recognize that the limitation of that idea is that we wouldn't want all ticket vending machines in the world to be replaced by squat systems. This would greatly reduce throughput of people into public transit and would be frustrating. But it highlights that sometimes we can do cool and innovative projects. They don't need to necessarily replace the whole existing system, but rather target a particular group of people and be efficacious at creating the behavior change that we seek. And so a couple of gamification design principles I want to share with you before we wrap up. The first one is the rewards hierarchy. And I created this rewards hierarchy some time ago, still works really well. It's called SAPS, and it stands for status, access, power, and stuff. And this is the list of rewards that people want for good behavior. So when they do the thing you want them to do, what they want in order is status, access, power, and stuff. Stuff is, and so let me just walk through these. And for anybody who's done kind of military organizational architecture, many of these ideas will make a lot of sense to you, which is that first and foremost, people are concerned with status. They want rank, they want position, they want the demonstration of that rank. And there's a subset of the population that really gravitates towards this sort of status things. And the most powerful thing about status is that the loss aversion for status is greater than the achievement desire for status. That means once you have a status, you are much more likely to continue to do what you need to do to achieve that status versus if you don't have it in the first place. And that explains a lot about loyalty program design and the way we design systems. Access is about giving people the opportunity to do things that they otherwise could not do for any, for money or effort. So really cool behind the scenes things or access to special events and so on. Power is giving people control over others, whether that's real or virtual. It's giving people more control, more agency. And stuff is free things, discounts, gift cards, money, right? Now, the reason why this hierarchy exists is an important psychological condition called habituation. Okay, so how habituation works, every time you're presented with a stimulus, any stimulus you're presented with, each time you're presented with it, it generally has a reduced effect on the response in your brain. And this is done on purpose because if we didn't have this habituated brain, we wouldn't be able to focus on anything because everything would feel novel at all times. Like, oh my God, it's cold. Oh my God, it's cold, right? Like we would have trouble tamping down the signals from our body and the world around us so that we can focus on higher order functions. This system exists for that reason. The habituation system, however, also makes everything boring after a while. Every single thing gets boring if taken to its logical extent. And so what's important is that the reward systems that incentivize behavior need to scale disproportionately with that habituation boredom curve. And you can bend that curve by building great systems that are highly algorithmic and really smart, and that's stuff that we do. Or you can do that by raising the scalability of your reward architecture. And that means instead of giving people cash for everything that they do, give them status, access, and power first, and create interesting benefits that people can earn that will make them feel motivated and make them want to keep doing things. The last framework I want to talk about is progress, achievement, and mastery. And for those of you who have read Dan Pink's book Drive, this features prominently in the sort of distillation of what motivates people to act a particular way. And progress, achievement, and mastery, the thing that jumped out at me when I first read these three things in research and then in the book is these are identical. These are literally symmetric with how games are designed and how gamified systems are created. Like, if you think about game-based environment, one of the big things that a game does is gives you a sense of progress. So it tells you how you're doing, what your score is, how much progress you still need to make to get to the next thing. It gives you achievement. So it kind of tells you, like, you did it, that's great, you did it, that's great, right? And then there's mastery, which is the sense that you're able to do well at this particular game or this particular experience. So the important thing that I want to leave you with is that the design of gamified systems, whether that is for reducing distraction, improving culture, retaining people, recruiting people, or for that matter, simply to tell the brand story or train, that the promise for gamification is that it is very aligned, it is perfectly aligned with basic human needs, basic human desires. It gives a scalable way of dealing with this, highly distracted environment and the challenges of our current time. It is a democratizing tool set and has wide implication. And I very much appreciate the time from all of you today. And my Twitter handle's on there, and Charlie has my email address. So I don't know if we're going to do questions now or whenever, but you guys are always welcome to contact me. Thank you.